It was October 1955, and the air in Huntsville, Texas was thick with dust and barbecue smoke and adrenaline. Thousands of people packed into the stands, cheering louder than at most professional rodeos. This wasn't just a local fairground gig. This was the Texas Prison Rodeo, the biggest event of its kind, where convicted felons played cowboy for one wild afternoon. Inmates dressed in striped shirts and chaps were bucked off bulls, flung by broncos, and chased by angry steers, all while being cheered on by everyday Texans and visiting celebrities. The line between punishment and performance was blurry at best. But behind the spectacle, beneath the laughter and the clanging cowbells, one man wasn't here to ride. He had a different plan. He wasn't looking for applause. He was looking for a way out. And by the time the final horn sounded and dust began to settle over the arena, one man was missing, and no one noticed until the crowd had emptied, the bleachers were bare, and it was far, far too late. This is the story of one of the boldest, cleanest prison escapes in American history. An escape executed under the nose of guards, fans, and the entire state of Texas. A story of deception, timing, and just enough luck to make you wonder how many other stunts like it we've never heard of. This is the story of the Texas Prison Rodeo escape. The Texas Prison Rodeo started in 1931 as a way to boost inmate morale and raise funds for the prison system. But by the 1950s, it had grown into a full-blown phenomenon. Held every Sunday in October at the Huntsville Prison Rodeo Arena, the event drew crowds of up to 20,000 people. This wasn't a pity rodeo, it was a spectacle. People came from all over the state to see convicted felons risk their neck for cash prizes and cheers. They treated the inmates like local celebrities, and governors and movie stars and reporters from as far away as New York City came to witness it. Even Johnny Cash would later play there. The inmates trained for months. Events included bronc riding, bull riding, cutting horses, barrel racing, and the infamous hard money event, where a small coin purse was tied to the head of an enraged bull. The first inmate to snatch it won the prize, and bragging rights. Security was present, but the atmosphere was much looser than usual. The guards were scattered, distracted by livestock and crowds and the sheer chaos of it all. Inmates chosen to participate were usually considered low risk and rewarded for their good behavior. And they had surprising levels of access, which is exactly what made Carl Ray Brackett such a threat. Brackett was 32 years old, tall, wiry, and quiet. He had dark eyes and a very thick southern drawl. He'd been locked up for armed robbery and assault, but wasn't violent inside the walls. In fact, Carl was a model inmate. Before prison, he had worked as a mechanic and a welder, and inside he earned a spot on the rodeo support team, but not as a performer, as maintenance crew. His job was to fix bucking chutes, repair electrical wiring, and grease the metal gates that corralled angry bulls. This job gave him something rare: access to almost every corner of the stadium and beyond. Storage sheds, costume trailers, fencing gates. He kept a low profile, he did his work well, and he waited. Over time, Carl studied the layout like a chessboard. He noted which gates were unguarded during key transitions. He clocked the volunteer schedules, and most of all, he noticed that near the end of each show, crowds would flood out early, overwhelming the exits and making it nearly impossible to tell who was an inmate and who was just dusty and sunburned. And he also noticed something else: the catering trucks. Carl's plan took shape slowly. Over the course of 3 months, he set the stage. He created excuses to fix equipment near the volunteer gates. He made friendly conversation with vendors and delivery workers. He learned names, and he learned rhythms. And then, about 2 weeks before the October 23rd rodeo, Carl began stashing items: a pair of slacks, a civilian shirt, a small pouch of coins he'd bartered for inside. He hid them behind a seldom-used electrical cabinet near the bull chute, just inside the main exit. On the morning of the rodeo, everything went according to schedule. Carl woke early, helped prep the arena, and ran checks on the gate systems. Around midday, he quietly checked on his stashed items. They were still there. As the rodeo kicked off, he went about his duties without drawing much attention. He wiped down equipment, adjusted wiring, and carried tools around the outer fence. He stayed calm, and he waited. And then came the final event. The hard money event was pure chaos. 10 inmates, 1 bull, and a prize worth chasing. The crowd was louder than it had been all day. This was their favorite event. The dust rose into the air like smoke, and guards stood with their backs turned, focusing on the mayhem inside the arena. And Carl, he slipped away. He ducked behind a shed, changed into the slacks and shirt, smoothing down his hair with water from a livestock trough. Then he grabbed a clipboard and walked. Yes, walked straight toward the main gate with a purpose. A tired vendor waved him through, and another man asked if he'd seen the lost keys for the beverage trailer. Carl shrugged and kept walking. He climbed into the back of a catering truck that was idling by the loading zone, and about 90 seconds later, it drove off, and Carl was gone. The head count wasn't done until well after nightfall, and by the time anyone realized Carl Brackett was missing, he'd been gone for nearly 5 hours. The manhunt kicked off immediately, but there wasn't much to go on. No one had seen Carl leave, there were no photographs, no witnesses, just whispers. One woman claimed she saw a man with a clipboard and no name tag walk past her truck. Another said she noticed a hitchhiker on the highway wearing state-issued boots, but no one followed up on that. 3 weeks passed. Carl Brackett had vanished like smoke. But then, a tip came in from Shreveport, Louisiana. A man matching Carl's description had taken a job at a local tire shop. He was calling himself Ray Carter. He worked hard and he kept to himself, and he even went to the local church. But Carl made one mistake. When a co-worker got injured on the job, he drove the man to the hospital using a salvaged car from the lot, one that had mismatched license plates. A nurse noticed that the plate didn't match the registration form that had been filled out, and, as was her duty, she reported it to the local police, who followed up. When they ran the plate and found the car was unregistered, they walked into the hospital and asked for ID. Carl could not provide one. They arrested him on the spot. Fingerprint confirmation came 2 days later. Carl didn't resist. In fact, he reportedly told the officer, well, that was a good run. Texas authorities kept it quiet. No press release, no photographs. The story was buried, deliberately. The rodeo was just too popular, too profitable. A high-profile escape could shut it down, or worse, make it a target for copycats. Carl was returned to the Walls unit and resumed general population duties. And he didn't try to escape again. He earned parole in 1968, 12 years after his rodeo escape, and 5 years longer than he was originally sentenced to serve. After that, no one knows what became of him. The Texas Prison Rodeo itself continued until 1986. Changing views on prison labor, funding issues, and internal scandals brought it to an end. Today, most people under 40 or 50 years old have never heard of it. But if you dig into old prison archives, if you flip far enough back into the logs, you'll find a note. A brief entry in neat handwriting that reads, Brackett, Carl R. Escaped during rodeo event. Recovered 3 weeks later. No further incidents. Carl didn't break through bars or tunnel through walls. He walked out, using timing, trust, and a plan that no one saw coming. And he did it during one of the most watched prison events in the country. We talk a lot about masterminds, about genius escapes and elaborate plans, but sometimes the most effective escape is the quietest one. Carl Brackett rode nothing that day at the rodeo, but he just might have pulled off the greatest ride of all.